Hello, everyone, and welcome to SIA Tech Chats. I'm Rihanna Collier, and I'm joined today by John Gunn, Chief Marketing Officer at Basco. Now, John and I have known each other for over 10 years, where he's held various senior level roles in the IT security space. So I'm very excited to have him here today to share some thoughts on where we are with IT security. So, John, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure to join you. It's actually quite an honor. I've been involved and supported the SIIA for more than a decade now, and I think it's a great organization. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, let's jump right in, John. I want to talk security. So there are so many things affecting security today, from mobile to IoT, and I want to touch on both of them actually. As IoT continues to evolve, obviously the concerns over security evolve as well. How do you think IoT is really impacting the security space today, and what advice would you give companies that need to secure IoT projects?
It's a really great question, and we could spend a whole hour just on that, but I'll have mercy and try and boil it down to just three key areas where it will impact companies. One is how they might interface with their customers, for those that have consumer-facing applications or relationships. The other one is how it affects the projects that they may be rolling out if they're creating IoT devices or that's part of their solution. And the third one is how it changes the attack or the threat profile for the companies. And I'll address that last one first. Last October, at the end of October, for about 5 hours, many popular websites, Twitter, Spotify, Shopify, were inaccessible because there was a massive DDoS attack against them. And what was unique about it was it was launched with using millions of devices. Now, for years, you probably heard about people compromising individuals' personal computers and creating armies of bots to launch attacks, whether they're spamming attacks or phishing attacks or distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks. But this was unique because it was using IoT devices, primarily closed-circuit TV devices or digital recording devices, more than 1 million of them, because they're not very well secured. And where this might impact businesses in the future is this attack was against the domain name server, but hackers could compromise these essentially unprotected devices and then attack companies. And ransomware has been in the news a lot because someone will attack a company, get an employee to click on an email, then they'll encrypt all their data and say you have to pay us to get it back. Well, the kind of attack a hacker organization could launch now against a company would be to say, we have this army of bots and we will flood your website with these requests from all these devices, and no one will be able to access your website unless you pay us, whatever amount it might be, $5,000 or $10,000, and so those attacks will probably become more common. These ransomware type attacks or extortion based on attacks that will be carried out with unprotected IoT devices. And most of these devices are made so they can't later be protected. The cameras that are out there, the passwords, they have factory default passwords, so all 1 million cameras have the same passwords. They can easily be compromised. And the password can't be changed because it's hard-coded into the firmware. So that's one area where businesses face an increasing risk that people will use these unprotected devices. You've also, a lot of people heard about the attack on automobiles. As automobiles integrate, IoT technology, that a hacker could take control of an automobile and pose a risk to an individual. So these unprotected devices are risky. But they do present some opportunities for businesses to enhance their security in their fight against fraud. An example of that is if you're any type of organization where you have individuals log in remotely, consumers, for example, at a bank or for an online application or making payments. In the old days, somebody knew their username and password, and that's how you identified who they were. Of course, the risk was that somebody would steal that username and password and pretend they were them, and businesses couldn't always tell who that was. IoT helps expand that because it's changed from kind of a no-go situation to I now have multiple ways to tell that Rihanna really is Rihanna. Not only do you know your password, but you have a device you're using. I recognize it's your phone you're using. Or if you have a smartwatch, that's now part of the profile. If you also have a Fitbit or an exercise type device, that's part of that profile. So I have these multiple layers I can tell who you are, and it makes it more difficult for hackers to impersonate you on all these devices. Now, it doesn't mean a business might not give you access to your social media account if you didn't have all of them at once, but it could change the risk profile. And if it came to authorizing a purchase, if it's a cup of coffee, maybe Starbucks doesn't care if you don't have your Fitbit that day or you're not in your usual car. But if it's your bank and someone's trying to transfer $1,000 from your account to an account in Eastern Europe, then they're going to detect that, raise that profile, and probably deny that transaction. So in that regard, the proliferation of IoT devices will help companies raise their level of security and protect themselves against attacks. Now, the third area I mentioned was the projects that companies are doing. It would be beneficial if all companies that are making IoT devices, whether they're a child's toy, whether they're a camera, or whatever it might be, consider the risk profile they're creating for everybody else. Right now, there aren't any strict regulations that require companies to meet certain standards. For some of the other devices, there's underwriter labs, for safety. There's kids' pajamas can't be flammable, things like that. There's all these consumer protection regulations. It doesn't exist in IoT. The Europeans are contemplating that right now, and I expect they'll move first. But until that day comes when companies are required to protect these devices, make them secure, not give them all the same password, make the password changeable, companies have to do it on their own and take responsibility for the devices that they're putting out there and the risk it may pose to their users and other companies.
So what about mobile security? I mean, with the amount of growing mobile devices, we face the same sort of risks. But I feel like there's a lack of urgency in addressing mobile security issues, maybe similar to IoT. Why is that?
You have an interesting perspective, and it depends which angle you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from the aspect of a bank, they're investing massive amounts in making their mobile applications safe because your assets are accessible through that mobile app. So they're really on the front edge. When it comes to people like Twitter, for example, and I'll try not to keep picking on them. I think it's because I use it so much and I love Twitter. They're going to come up as an example. But you look at the millions or billions of Twitter users. Most people don't care if someone attacks their account. They've got 500 followers and actually maybe 2 people actually read their tweets. So if somebody compromises it, they don't care. What they want is they don't want to have a hassle. So you can see where Twitter might not invest a lot of money in protecting that on an individual basis, but they still do on a general basis. So if you look at those that really have to protect their mobile apps, in primarily the banking community and other places where there's valuable assets, they've really done a lot, and the mobile platform has opened up new avenues to protect those transactions. I would argue that today, and by the way, banking is our primary area of technology. Vasco is a leading provider of anti-fraud solutions to the world's leading banks. We've got about half of the top 100 top banks in the world rely on us to protect their online banking. In fact, Rihanna, if you were doing online banking this afternoon, you're probably using a Vasco product to make it safe. So we have a lot of insights into what they're doing. And I would argue that the mobile platform is more safe than online because we have so many ways now to detect and prevent fraud. And I'll tell you a few of those. If you're online, you're using a laptop, and I can tell if it's a regular laptop you usually use. I can tell by your patterns. I can tell other things of that. So I can go pretty far on that. But with the phone, I can go so much further. For example, when you're looking at your phone, you have a forward-looking camera. I can do face authentication. MasterCard announced last summer that they were doing selfie authentication. We have banks that are using that now. I can tell if you opened your phone with your fingerprint or the pattern you typed in if your phone was locked. I can tell your geolocation. And if you're a banking customer, there are normal patterns to that. You usually bank at your home or your office, or maybe you visit your mother in Kansas frequently. But if you're banking somewhat other than that, it doesn't mean I won't let you bank. It just means that I have to be aware that this is a higher risk transaction. So I can look at all these elements. I can look at not only that you open the phone with a PIN, and I can tell your fingerprint and your face, but I can tell the way you press the keys, how hard you press the keys, the milliseconds of time between you entering those keys, that pattern, because every human does it differently, and a bot obviously does it differently. So I have all these ways to detect if the fraud is happening. And the really exciting thing about it is so many of them that I've described right now happen in the background. So I've raised the level of security without imposing on you. I don't make you do 20 things to get access to your bank account. And it'll be very soon we'll have what I call zero login, where you'll just simply touch the app on your phone and you'll be in your bank account. But the bank will have done 20 different fraud checks in the background in that moment between you pressing that and you actually using the account. And then on top of all of that, Basco and companies like us have risk analysis solutions. So not only look at your human behavior, but we look at your actions, and we map those against this ever-growing pool of normal actions so we can detect anomalous behavior. And all of this is enabled by the mobile device. In fact, we even go so far as being able to tell if somebody else's malware is on the device. We don't care what kind of malware. If it's trying to interfere with that transaction, we can detect that, and we can stop that transaction or stop that malware. So even if the phone manufacturer or your antivirus supplier can't protect the phone, we can protect that transaction, and having it happen on a mobile device makes that all possible. So in that regard, we see the move to mobile not only introducing a lot of convenience to the users, but also allows us to do a lot more security in the background, creating a safer transaction environment with a lot less hassle.
So talk to the small to medium-sized businesses for a minute. Is there any way for them to really assess how secure their businesses are, their applications are at the moment?
You know, that's a very good question. It's a very tough answer because you have the basics. A lot of small companies underinvest. And, sometimes just your profile makes you less of a risk. I mean, I have a bunch of teenage kids. We have a bunch of beater cars in the driveway. Any burglar is going to break into my neighbor's house where there's 2 Mercedes. And in a sense, small businesses are safe in that regard because there aren't that many assets to steal. So they're less of a target, but hacking organizations are growing. Every year they grow, the number of attacks that grow. And what also is scary for small, medium-sized businesses is that the tools that hackers use are becoming more available to, let's say, amateur hackers who otherwise couldn't develop their own tools. They can now use those tools that more sophisticated hackers have developed, and they'll either rent those tools or buy those tools, or they share a part of their ill-gotten gains with the developer of it. So the hacking community has become very sophisticated in sharing their attack techniques, and as that happens, small and medium-sized business will be placed at greater risk, because whereas a large hacking organization might decide it's not worth it, an amateur in the same neighborhood or in the same country, or not even the same country, but a small-time player could use those same big-time tools to attack small businesses. Maybe they're looking for $500 of ransomware instead of $5,000. So there is increasing risk. It starts with, the basics, which are, of course, having an adequate budget to protect themselves, and then having personnel that have the experience and the knowledge and the certifications to protect them. This is part of why the cloud is growing so fast, because the bar is getting raised every year. And large organizations keep spending more and more to protect themselves. And small and mid-sized businesses simply can't keep up. And when they move their services and their infrastructure to the cloud, they essentially have pooled their security resources. And if their budget for IT security is only $100,000, well, if there's 500 of them, now they've got a $50,000 combined budget. Maybe that's 500,000 for IT security. Now they've got some serious defenses. So it's going to, in many small businesses have already moved their IT security and their infrastructure to the cloud. The increasing number of attacks will continue to accelerate that. And that'll probably even move upstream to where mid-sized businesses, even large businesses, will be forced to move their When you consider the investment, for example, that Bank of America and Chase make in IT security, it's almost $500 million a year. There may come a day where to protect yourself as a bank against attacks, you'll have to spend $100 million. Most banks won't have that amount to invest and still remain viable, and they'll move to the cloud. So that's probably the best defense right there. Yeah, and having a strong security posture, doing a regular profile of where their vulnerabilities are, doing regular assessments, those are all critically important. And having the tools to identify attacks in real time and mitigate those attacks. And then a recovery plan. You hear about companies that are victims of ransomware and they didn't have their files backed up. So they're really in a lot of trouble. So a lot of times it's just these small businesses have to do the basics. And the CEOs and leaders of those businesses have to know the people they have are aware of the basics. They may not even know that the people should be doing that. And that's where it sometimes breaks down. And if you hire a specialist but you don't have the full knowledge, it's hard for you to know if that specialist is really going to do the right thing to protect you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts and insights today. For more information on VASCO and SIIA, please visit our website and stay tuned for next week's Tech Chat.